Hello everyone and welcome back. I'm Sarah Liz. I'm excited to be sharing an interactive project with you using the Dare2B Artzy hide and seek die. When you open up the card, these two flaps come swinging out from this little box where they hide, and you've got room to decorate two little rectangles. I've got a sentiment and these cute little hedgehugs that I loved so much. I think this is going to be a card for my kids, maybe my husband, but my kids will laugh more. So I'm starting with a piece of craft cardstock that is just a little smaller than 6 by 6. I want to be able to tape this to my stencil. I'm just going to use some mint tape. It's like a Post-it tape, but cheaper. You can get it from scrapbook.com. They sell like a multi-pack. I buy the multi-pack. And then this is Picket Fence Studio Paper Glaze. I try to link everything below. This one came in a trio. I think it's the Santa's Workshop trio. I got it in like a crafty goodie bag, but I think it's the same as just their Poinsettia red paper glaze. It's got a little bit of shimmer to it. It dries super fast. So I've got some press and seal on there to make sure it doesn't dry out. And I am going to peel this off my paper, and I have a bucket of warm soapy water on the floor of my craft room right next to me. This is the second panel I've decorated this way, and I found that after the first one, despite the immediate water bath, not all of it came off my stencil. I'm not super worried about it, but just a heads up. I've also linked this stencil, but they have another heart stencil that I like, I think even more, and it's on clearance, so it's like $3.50. Check that one out. This is the die set from Dare2B Artzy, and first we're going to cut the mechanism pieces from some craft cardstock. So that first piece is the arm that swings out, and then the box that it hides in, and then that other rectangle is where we're going to decorate our pieces. So I've cut actually two of those rectangles, one to swing out from each side, and I will set those aside. And then we're going to cut the decorating pieces from some red cardstock. You'll see that there are layers, right? So to go on that box on the top where they have the snowman, I'm going to cut a piece of red, and then I'm going to also cut that little piece, that little rectangle that goes on the very, very front of the box. Then I'm going to pull the decorator piece for one of my rectangles that swings out. And on the example on the front, you can see that they've stacked up layers of cardstock using these decorating pieces, but I found the mechanism moved more smoothly if I kept it flat. So I am going to cut the decorating pieces out of one layer, essentially. So I'm going to put a white rectangle in the middle that I am going to stamp on and color. And then that little red frame will go around it, so it will all sit flush, and I'm not going to create any catch points as it's moving in and out. I love the packaging on this. It's got all your instructions, and the dies are set up so that they can be labeled. They're on there with some temporary adhesive, and that works really well. This is the arm mech, and you can see it's got some great score lines. I want you to see that there's some diagonal lines that we're going to need to use. And also to note that I had to run this through my spellbinders. When I went through my Gemini, it kept digging in deep enough that I was cracking my cardstock. I could have changed the sandwich, but my plates are all taped together. So I'm folding both of those flaps towards the middle. And then on the thicker one, I've got those diagonal score lines, and I am just going to bend those back and forth, right? I'm just loosening them up because we're going to do some fancy folding. My son says it looks like origami here. So now I'm going to take that and I'm going to stick my thumb right in that triangle and push it in towards the middle. And I'm going to do that with both of them. We're going to do this twice. So if this is going fast, just wait. We'll label them with a pencil, and we'll do this one more time. So this is what our mechanism is going to look like once we have it all folded up. Okay, so I'm going to label. I have flap H and flap J. And then in the middle, we have section I. I'm also using a pencil to mark those diagonal score lines to help you see those, because we definitely want to make sure that we're loosening those up before we try to tuck them into the middle. Okay, so I am going to fold in side J, and then here's where I'm loosening those 2 diagonal score lines, and then I am just going to push that triangle towards the middle. All right, and then it will fold. H is going to keep sticking out. Then I will fold the next piece in towards the middle as well, and it all kind of folds up like that. Okay, so that's my mechanism. Even though my card is going to be in landscape, I'm going to put it together in portrait because it's a little bit easier for me to start that direction. So here I am adding some glue to the outside of section J. I used my pencil and added another J just to make that clear. And I'm butting it up right into the crease of the card, and I'm going to fold it closed and I'm going to press on it. Okay, next, this is that box that they hide it in. There are 2 score lines at the top, and I have labeled one of them section D. Section D is the only place on this side where we're going to add glue. I found that it was easier to decorate this piece before I added it to the card, so I'm going to add my red decorating rectangle, and there's a lovely like piercing pattern all around the outside. I love these extra little details because it makes my card look really fancy, even though honestly this was pretty simple and quick. Then I'm adding that little rectangle to the front. There again, there's a score line right above and below that, and so I've got just a little bit of a border. I used a set of nesting heart dies to decorate the front of this card. The bottom ones are just laid out so far. This is from a set I've had for a million years that I don't think is available any longer, but I'll link something similar below that has a similar heart shape. I try to keep things pretty simple when I'm creating a fancy mechanism. So for me, this worked really well. I'm adding my glue to section H. There is a score line between H and I don't want the glue to go above that score line. Okay, so I'm lining this piece up right there, and then if I swing the arms out, I can fold it and just check that that's flush, right? If it doesn't go all the way up to the score line, then this little box is going to hang out the side of your card, or in my case, the bottom of my card when it's folded shut. Okay, I'm about to make a big mistake here. I'm using my fingers to smear out the glue. You really need those corners folded down well, or they're going to create a catch point. So then I pressed this flat without looking. Okay, so when I go to open it, that box isn't moving. I have tucked one of those arms underneath the section. Thankfully, this is barely art glue. It's not an immediate grab, so I had enough room to pull it apart, and I'm re-gluing. Again, I'm going to kind of use my finger to smear that glue a little bit, and I'm going to tuck it underneath the arms this time. Okay, so every time I'm making an interactive card like this, I am always trying to move and fold it flat and then open it up and double checking. I've made cards and not done that, and I find out later that the mech doesn't work, and I'm not sure where I went wrong. Once that's glued down, I'm going to add glue to section I, stopping at the score line, and I'm going to fold my card closed. You want to give this some good time to dry. I'm about to open it, and you can see the mech works, but the cardstock is pulling apart, so I've pressed it firmly. I'm setting it aside, and we're going to work on these 2 rectangles. They're going to flip out from underneath our box. So I am adding this little red rectangle. Remember, I nested the 2 dies together so that when I assemble all of this, it's going to be flush, all the same layer. Then I stamped hedgehugs and kisses and some hearts and love you onto this one. And then I'm going to add a similar rectangle to the other one, but I want to show you what I did with the coloring. You guys, I'm not a colorist. I can do it, but I think this took me 10 million years. So I didn't want to mess it up when I went to cut it. So I have a piece of, I think it's like 65-pound cardstock. It's not printer paper. So I'm going to frame it out, and then I'm just going to wiggle that die until it sits right inside there. It kind of snaps into place. And then I covered it up with a piece of scratch paper so my plates wouldn't muck up my Hedgehugs. And that way I knew I wasn't going to mess it up and have to recolor this image. I'm going to add that right inside of my red rectangle. And then again, this side will also sit flush. That way, when they're sliding in and out, I don't have anything for the corners to catch on because these two pieces sit right on top of each other underneath. So when I was assembling my card, I didn't shove that piece IJK, yeah, the arms. I didn't shove that all the way into the crease of the card. And that's why my card doesn't open completely flat. If you make sure you wedge it all the way in there, it will open flat. This is a little bit easier. Then I'm adding glue all along that arm. And I'm going to wedge this hedgehog piece just very slightly underneath. I don't actually want that to swing 100% out of there because again, it might catch as it's swinging shut. So I have just the slightest little bit of that underneath the box. And you can see it's hanging out a little bit on the right and we'll clip that off. That is not a big deal. I'm doing the same thing with the other side. I'm wedging it it's maybe a millimeter, just the tiniest little bit inside the box. And I'm making sure it sits all the way flush against the edge of that arm. Okay, so I'll use my long scissors and I'll clip that off, which is really not hard because I've got kind of a ridge from the 2 layers of cardstock. That's what I cut off. See how small that is? Not a big deal. Okay, so I'm going to close this and I need to help it a little bit. It's a paper mechanism, so sometimes you have to train it, right? You have to press down and then you have to just move it a whole bunch and make sure that the paper knows where it's supposed to go. So if you find that it's not closing smoothly the first time, that's not unusual. Just help it along and press it. You'll see on the bottom corners, those bottom corners are not coming all the way out either, and that's maybe even more important than the top. There's a little bit of bulk on this now that I have the mechanism in there. It probably would have been easier to decorate the front of this before the inside mech got added, but my paste wasn't dry yet. I think it took about 20 minutes, right? It's winter in Nebraska and there's 0 moisture in the air. So I am adding a piece of red cardstock that's 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, and then I cut this 1/4 inch shorter on each side. So it is 4 by 5 1/4, and I'm just going to press firmly down on that. Then I wanted to keep the front of this fairly simple. I spent a bunch of time on the inside. So that's really, I want people to open it and be like, oh, that's the front, right? This love die is massive and I have no idea where it came from. This has been in my stash for years, long enough that it's from before I labeled my dies and where they came from, right? They were like all in a book. So it is going to sit diagonally, and I added a black shadow underneath that just to help it pop a little bit off the front of that. And I'm going to lay that flat because that paste from the hearts underneath has a little bit of, I don't know, plasticness to it. I did let that dry for quite a while. Barely art glue is maybe not your best option if you're not going paper to paper. And this was like half and half. Then I added a little bit of shine with a Nuvo Aqua Shimmer pen. These have been hard to find for me lately. I still have one left, but I start to panic right around then. So if you find them, let me know. When I go to close this, you can see minor catching despite all of my hard work to keep that from happening. So what I'm going to do, again, I'm training my paper. I'm going to lift the corner of one side just a little bit up, and then I'm going to press the other corner down so they know which one's supposed to go on top and which one is supposed to go on the bottom, and then it works really smoothly. That's our project for today. I hope you liked it. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing, and I will see you next time.